Hey, it's Valerie Ling. I'm a clinical psychologist and I'm your host for the Clergy, Wellbeing Down Under podcast. I'm looking forward to interviewing an expert today to take you through my findings from my research where I asked 200 pastors down under how they were doing. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. Buckle up and here we go. Greetings, everybody, to yet another episode of our Clergy Wellbeing Down Under podcast. I have got Paul and Sue Harrington with me on this episode. Hello, Paul and Sue.
Good day.
Hi, it's great to be with you, Valerie.
Do you know, I have it come up on my memories that it is almost 1 year since I went to visit you in Adelaide.
Now, it was lovely having you visit and do a few sessions for us over here. Yeah, so
and it's been great getting to know you.
So I'd love for you to introduce yourselves, really, a bit about your story of ministry and where you are now and what you're doing.
Sure.
Okay, well, I became a Christian a week before I started university. I'd grown up in a sort of God-fearing family, but it was really God helps them who helps themselves sort of thing. But I had a few friends and a teacher actually that were different. So I became a Christian by God's kindness, and then, as I say, never recovered, and just have seen His kindness through every stage of my life. So we have 3 adult children, 8 grandchildren, goodness, just really have just loved our time in ministry. We both legal backgrounds, practice law a bit. I've done a bit on the side, right the way through basically, but mostly we've had our focus on ministry things, and just I'm so thankful and grateful to have had that privilege of being able to do that for the last
At Trinity?
Yeah,
it's about 35 years.
Yeah, at Trinity. Yeah. So that's where we went when we first became Christians, or very, very soon after. And so we tell them, if we're no good, it's your own fault, because we're a product of the ministry then.
And my story is very matched to Sue's. We're actually going out before either of us were Christians. Sue became a Christian just before going to uni. I was already at uni. And then about 3 or 4 months later, Sue took me for a walk around Adelaide University. It was on about our second circuit that she burst into tears on my shoulder and said God wanted her to break up with me. Now, at that point, I didn't think God existed, so I thought that was a bit bizarre. And but what it did was it triggered me to read the Bible with a friend that I knew had become a Christian at uni. Over a period of months, I went from thinking Jesus, Easter Bunny, Tooth Fairy to real person, and then the gap was so if he's real, what difference does it make? Sort of historical Jesus to personal Lord was really the jump point. Became a Christian, and Sue and I didn't go out for about 6 months after that. We thought, at least I thought, smart for me to try and work out which way was up as a Christian before, launching back into a relationship. So we mutually thought that was smart. Yeah. And then, and so going to Trinity I'd become a Christian effectively on campus. There were friends at uni who said, now you're a Christian, you ought to go to church. And I thought, well, it sounds reasonable, and so they took me down to Trinity. That was 1978. And that's when we first started going to Trinity, and both of us have just been, as Sue said, hanging around ever since. Yeah.
Tell us about the Trinity Network.
Sure. So when I joined the Trinity staff team, it was one church in the city, a church that had a long evangelical tradition here in Adelaide, Anglican, but in a non-evangelical diocese. So a larger city church, about 800 people, and I joined as the look after Sunday school, high school, and the young adults group, really. So I did that for about 5 years, although the role changed a bit over that time. Then the rector left and became a bishop in Sydney, and I was asked to become, the rector at that point. That was 1993. So at that stage, one church. Then, because we were essentially full on that site, the question we were asking was, how do we keep reaching unbelievers for Jesus? And one possibility was building a bigger building so we could, take more people because we'd reached capacity. Or the second was to think about church planting. And the planting idea appealed to us because it felt like we could keep replicating communities reaching out to others around Adelaide. So we planted our first church in 2001 from the city, and we're now 14 churches, across sort of Adelaide and wider South Australia, with a desire just to keep planting churches. And what we're doing is partnering together to try and reach our city and state with the gospel. That's where we're coming from.
And I remember the very first, the first church and the commissioning or the kickoff, the launch Sunday. And Paul said, "Don't think you've made it. This is by God's kindness, we're here. But I'm praying now for the church that you will plant." And we've seen that happen, and that that's what keeps happening in God's kindness.
So the church in 2001 planted a church in 2010, and further away from them, and then that church in 2010 that was planted in 2010 planted a church further away in 2015. So we've always wanted to be a network where we planted churches that planted churches that planted churches, and we're seeing that happen. There's been 5 churches planted from the larger city church, and then the rest of the churches have been planted from the daughter churches or granddaughter churches.
So almost 40 years as part of Trinity Network, starting from being converted all the way to now leadership. What have you seen? One of the, we met because I was at Reach. I think it was Reach. We did something together.
Yeah.
And then I came to talk to your leadership team about my observations about, burnout, because your network is looking to see how you can create structures or build things around your ministry teams. In the time that you've been in ministry and in leadership, what works well? What have you seen as being some of the ingredients for those of us in ministry to thrive?
I guess we had the privilege of being mentored by people at an early stage. So Robert and Margaret Forsyth would often have us in their home. And then Reg and Dorothy Piper, when we were on staff team, were very kind to us, having, just sort of taking us by the hand. So there is that sort of culture that even before, we were on the staff team, that we were the beneficiaries of.
Yep.
And also a respect for the leaders and a mutual love and care. So Paul often tells the staff when they come to Trinity that you will be given respect. You can lose it, but there is that automatic respect for the role and the and I think that becomes a mutual thing.
I think Sue's right. We're serving in ministry, and we've been here for a number of decades, but we stand on the shoulders of others who laid really good platforms. So I remember Reg Piper, he brought me onto the staff team. We shared a back fence. So often we'd walk in, about a half-hour walk into the Trinity City Church, and I'd pick his brain and he would sort me out on things. And there was a real fatherly relationship, I think, where he clearly wanted me to flourish as a person and in ministry. So because we're first generation believers, we felt like we've been making everything up as we go along. And the main way we've done that, I think, is by looking at people in the next stage on from us and trying to learn from them. So learning from the Pipers, for example, sharing a fence with them, how they thought about their marriage, how they thought about opening their home, how they thought about raising their children. We were able to learn a lot and observe, and just seeing, I think Reg Piper was a leader who I never got the sense that his role as the senior leader of the church had anything to do with his own ego. So he always had that clear intention of honouring God, building up other people around him. And I think that modelling was very key for us as we move forward. Not just Reg, we had excellent trustees and wardens and elder type people who were part of that culture. So it's been a privilege to serve in a church in our network where the focus has been very clearly established as we want to glorify God, preach the gospel, see people become Christians, and not get too fussed about stuff that doesn't matter, and keep doing that. So, those sort of backgrounds have been really important for us, I think.
Yeah. And all of life. Oh, sorry, just, all of life too. So absolutely key ministry, but also character. And then why you do certain things. So just sort of talking it through, and that freedom really to talk it through, and that honesty. Yeah.
And how are some of the ways you might have infused your experiences into the Trinity Network structures? This idea of mentoring and being able to pass on wisdom. How's that work?
Yeah, I think that I want to say that Sue has been really critical in helping in shaping actually the whole network culture, just in thinking through how we functioned as a family of leaders. Family needs to be used a bit loosely, but that collegial family warmth and relating together as we shared life and ministry together, I think particularly among staff and the key elders, the trustees. And I think that Sue's had a really critical, it'd be worthwhile talking about the way you've gone about thinking about wives. Household.
Yes, just that it is it's a team thing that we do, and that's important. We're all heading in the same direction, where the wives are so different. At the moment there's 28 pastors' wives, so that the important thing is we keep saying, being the best you can be, and with the gifts God's given you, the opportunities, the stage of life. I mean, there's so many differences, but just that sense of being sold out for Jesus, being really keen to serve God's people, to build up your spouse as well in that, and to minister within your own family setting, but that openness. One of the things we do is try and, over the years, initially it was just a small group of pastors' wives, and we'd meet once a fortnight and we'd pray and brainstorm things, or if someone was giving a talk, they'd use us as the testing, or if there was an issue, we'd talk through different things. And that was nice to have that confidential sort of supportive environment. As we've grown bigger, we've had to change that a little bit. So now there's 4 different groups that meet. But once a year, for example, we all go away for a few days, and we have somewhere between it's not a camp, and it's not a retreat, and it's not a conference, but somewhere in the middle of that. And the trustees have so kindly underwritten that, because they see the value of supporting households. And so we go away, we have some input, we have some fun time together, we pray together. So that's a good building time. We really see the importance of the family. So we want all the kids of the staff to feel like, isn't it wonderful that we're involved in, that our dads are involved in Trinity ministry, or or the rest of the family, or our mums. We've got women on the team as well, but so we want them to feel that it's a privilege and a joy. And so we do try and do things like every Christmas they get a helium balloon with a stocking attached or something, and just try and when they're doing the year 12, they get a year 12 survival pack. So just different things.
Because the ministry kids.
Yeah, the ministry kids.
The ministry team. So
who oversees that?
Me.
Okay.
So it's just kind of evolved, but we used to have this massive end of year thing at our house that was sort of like a carnival with all the staff in, but now we've got actually too big. But we do different things like we have a high tea for the staff wise at the end of the year and kick off things, and you know, get a speaker across, or, you know, so different things to try and say, look, it matters. We want to support each other. We want to, you know, do the best job we can with, which will vary what you know, exactly how it will look in every household, but just support and encourage each other.
So considering both of you are first generation Christians, how did you come up with all these ideas? What motivated that?
Interesting, really, because Sue, even though a first generation believer, her family was incredibly hospitable. And so that culture of hospitality and openness, which wasn't my family background for a range of different reasons, but for Sue it was. And I think that and Sue's very warm and relational. So that's I'm not saying I'm unrelational, but you know, Sue's very relational. I think that's infused a lot of that household culture that's in the place. And then I think we just kept making it up as we went along, trying to think through how do we keep growing our connected staff, leadership team, network of churches, all with clear focus and goals, but enjoying the benefit of being part of a Christian community on the way through in different levels. Yeah.
So I'm curious with regards to I love that you've mentioned the kids, with regards to the wives and the kids and the families in ministry, what would you say have been the key ingredients over the years that's helped that sense of belonging and connectedness to survive, even though you've grown much bigger?
Yeah. So I think as we, when we started off on the team, and as we kept going through different stages, it's been interesting to see that a lot of and this is the advantage of being a sort of a multi-staff team, there are a lot of kids actually growing up together, and those kids had peer relationships, I think, and family relationships. We didn't live in each other's pockets because we didn't have time, but nonetheless, the kids came through Sunday school and high school groups and young adult groups together. And I think that sense of being a part of those peer connected groups was really important for them. Then I think in our own family, Sue worked very hard for our kids to understand the privileges of being in the vocational ministry space. So, you know, if I came during the day to one of the kids' sports days, Sue would make a point of saying, you know, Dad can do this because he's in ministry and he has flexibility to come during the day. Lots of fathers can't do that. Sue would often pick up on a number of those things. The fact that there were lots of people in our churches praying for our family and our kids, quite extraordinary that they've had that. Sometimes that attention can be hard, but generally we were in a church community where they wanted our kids to do well, and they loved them and cared for them. And I think our kids grew up with that sense of the value of being a part of the church and a part of ministry family. So I think our kids have grown up at different stages. They probably had struggles with it, but at this stage, they'd all say it was a wonderful thing to grow up in a ministry family. Now, that's God's kindness, but, you know, we're very thankful for that. We were always wanting and praying that would be the case. And I think that's it. But a lot of that, I think, was shaped by Sue's very deliberate ministry thinking parenting, you know, going through.
And both of us, really, just that sense of seeing how what you say and what you don't say too. So we were careful what we said around the children when there were issues, because just age appropriate. So we didn't want them to have a weight beyond their years. Yeah, so I think that's been important, really, hasn't it?
Being wise about what we drew them into in terms of awareness of what was going on, because there'll always be issues or relationships that come up, and the kids didn't need to know. But we had this spot in our front veranda in our house, which was the sort of parent zone. So we go out there for a drink, a cup of coffee or whatever at the end of the day, and the kids were sort of barred from going out there. And that was our debrief time on a whole lot of things, which we sort through, which I think has been really important for us on the way through to keep processing stuff together. And normally we would do that at least, daily, really, as we went along. But that imparts the shape of our relationship as well.
Yeah, and I think that's right, because we can process together. We're not using the kids to process. And I guess that's just encouraging in that way. With the just as far as a wider network, we both really want, we try and make a point of, particularly if a child of one of the staff is struggling. So sometimes, struggling one way or another, either in their faith or, behaviour or whatever. But we want to know, we make a real effort that they know they are special, they are loved. So it's not performance based. So those kids, we, really, just want them not to feel the pressure of having to be perfect. And they are going to go through, some kids are going to go through times where they struggle, and that's part of hopefully them growing.
That sounds to me like at a network level, you've been able to foster a sense of belonging that the leadership tier, the ministers, spouses, and kids really have a sense of a belonging together through whatever rhythms and patterns that you have. So through the year, you have retreats, you have camps, you have things specifically for the ministry families. Is that what I'm hearing?
The retreat, one was for the wives. So, that going away was for the wives. I think each of it's a little bit different now that we're bigger, and things happen more in the local church. But I think that has been replicated.
Yeah, so at this stage with 14 churches, we're thinking that the relational spans to do it all in one place are probably too great, and we'd be finding ourselves spending the whole time just with each other in order to do that. Although when we get everyone together, I think when you were with us last year, we had a big staff house dinner. And I must admit, when I get together with that group, I think I'd love to go away and plant a church with these guys. Now, probably that isn't true, because there'd be too many chiefs and not enough Indians. But nonetheless, it's wonderful to share life with those people. But because of the size, what we've tried to do is to develop that same level of family connection at the regional level. And part of our task, I think, and our task at our stage of ministry, is to invest a little more deliberately in some people who will head up those regional, networks to help us retain the relational sense of belonging in the midst of a wider sense of wanting to reach our city and state with the gospel. So but that's more a structural approach as we move forward, and trying to think what's smart, because at the end of the day, we all have varying and limited relational capacities. And so you need to get that balance between the people you work most closely with and the wider church family that you're ministering alongside as well.
This is the midpoint break for the podcast. If you want to put a pause and walk away and come back to it, make sure you do check out the description for all the various downloads that we have for you, including my full report, research, and reflections. You might also want to remember to like, share, and subscribe. So stop now or keep going. Having spent some time with you in your home, I know that both of you talk quite a lot about how to figure out structures, how to figure out, what's your latest thinking about planting, 14 churches, scale, large populations now within your church, as well as managing the resourcing, the governance, and the connections that you all have with one another. What's the latest?
Yeah, so a few things, Sue will jump in on this as well, but at that leadership level, I think that a grouping of people into the regional areas with focus on those regions together, while still being part of an overall network, is where we're heading at this point in time. What we want to do is make sure we don't set up a structure that limits our ability to reach more people with the gospel. So sometimes organizational structures put in artificial glass ceilings and you bounce off them, not for no other reason except you haven't thought your way through them. And one of the potential glass ceilings for our network is Sue and I. That is, if everything has to come back through us, if we're the sort of mum and dad of the network, and all the kids can only relate to each other us, that's a glass ceiling. So the ability to divest into other key leaders and organizational groups that help us do the same thing, but with the same values is really important. So that's what we're thinking. So if you said to me, what would I like to see in, say, 10 years' time, I'd be thinking probably double the number of churches that we have, maybe 30 churches. That will require rethinking some of our core support structures. Our goal is for churches to be really the healthy coalface of what we do. And so we're happy to resource that, essentially the things that will free up those churches to do very healthy ministry. So that involves things like finance support, safe ministry arrangements that are centrally supported and enabled. That sort of structural stuff that actually helps churches function well. And then thinking through how our churches keep collaborating in a wider sense, partnering together with that wider concern for the gospel. And I think we'll always be trying to work that out. I don't think we'll ever arrive at a solution. And I think every stage of growth will present new challenges and opportunities that you need to grapple with in order to be healthy moving forward. So that's some of what we're thinking through. I think the leadership pipeline, how we grow deep disciples who step into leadership, I think that's a challenge for us moving forward. One we need to pay attention to. Your thoughts?
Well, I think it is that sense of always changing to meet the next lot of challenges and to sustain for sustainability, but also for care and health as well, but effectiveness as well. So just that, I remember one, an old friend of Paul said, "Are you still at Trinity?" Who wasn't a Christian. I thought, but his job has changed every year. That sense of, needing to do the next thing, which has kept you interested as well. But that sense of, and I think our structures have changed. So they just keep adapting when we need it. Just the other week, we had the northern region had a celebration where they all got together, and it was it's feasible for the northern region all to get together. The place was packed and everybody, it was a celebration, and they launched questions to ask your non-Christian friends, and then they're going to all have a joint sermon series that are some of these answers, and it was a real sense of celebration. And then the churches got back together where they'd all planted off each other, sort of thing, from each other. So I think that idea of, well, that is workable. I'd love to see everyone all together, hire the
convention center or
whatever, that, which would be great, a great celebration, but actually it's probably not nearly as effective as that that region, because they've got the relational links. They'll have the encouragement, and then they can do something together. The youth too, there's been, youth groups, critical mass is important for youth. And so, there's some area youth working together, and then, once a term now that all the youth in the network get together. So it's not just, what's happening in my little church. There's a bigger thing happening, and there's other Christians outside, mum and dad's church.
With so much activity and being intentional to keep the network functioning and connected, what are your views on the burnout piece? So, my survey, predominantly senior ministers, a large percentage of them burning out, really struggling to keep up with a lot of the demands that come with the role. How does that fit in your network, do you think? What do you see?
So I think we're like most churches, networks. It's an issue that is real for us. And part of it is, I think, that we generally have people on our staff teams who are very self-motivated. So they're not natural boundary setters for themselves, because they love to see things moving forward for the glory of God. So I think that that's one of the things we've become more aware of in recent years. That COVID period highlighted some of that for us, like it did for lots of people. We were seeing more fraying occur, in terms of how people were going in their well-being. So that's, I think, one of the areas that we've become more alert to, Sue and I, but also the whole network, our board as well, and thinking through what's going on. And so, for example, when you were across, I can't remember if it was 12 months ago, when we got together with the leaders, they really were concerned to proactively think through how do we help our staff in particular, thinking that will then roll down for churches, but think, how do we help our staff in that well-being space moving forward? What are the things we can do overall as a network to make that more likely? How do we keep surveying patterns of our staff, their households, hearing from, whole households like wives and children, not just staff members or, husbands of wives who are working with us or whatever, but thinking through how we take a better pulse check on that. I think one of the things I've become more aware of as time has gone on is the critical nature of helping our staff to be self-aware. And if you'd asked me when I was recruiting 30 years ago, my top tips for recruiting, it wouldn't have included self-awareness. But now I say to myself, and I say to people, I think the first thing I'm looking for when I'm recruiting is someone who has good self-awareness moving forward. Because if they understand themselves and they're secure in their relationship with God and the way God has made them, then they're going to be much more comfortable with working out how they live in that space and how they work collaboratively with others, given their strengths and otherwise. So that's been helpful for me. I have some strengths in ministry, but I have gaps. Being aware of my gaps helps me work out the implications for other people around me. It also helps me partner with other people who complement me, and I complement them as we move forward together. And I think that if it doesn't mean you don't keep growing and developing, but it's a much healthier space to be in moving forward. And I think that self-understanding awareness, not being preoccupied with self, but enough awareness there really does help you flourish in the space when you're in ministry, I think.
And I think that's one of the reasons why, if you looked across the leaders at Trinity, we don't just have one type of, often the church planter is the, perhaps one end of the extreme extrovert come entrepreneur, but partly because we've got the support structure behind it. They don't have to be able to do budgets and whatever in quite the same way. But
who does the budgets, Sue?
The the church does some, but there's a lot central. A lot of the admin is done centrally. The leadership teams put forward budgets and things like that, but the bookkeeping and stuff is done centrally. So there's they don't have to be quite as much of a jack of all trades as in other situations.
I interrupted you. Yeah.
No. But what it means is, as long as people realise, look, I'm not as strong on this, but they have other people on their launch team that might be strong on that, then it doesn't matter if they're not if they don't have all the areas of expertise. And a minister's never expected really to have all the areas of expertise, but they do have a leadership responsibility to make sure certain things are covered. So it's that wisdom, I think, that's really important.
So I must remember to come back to the network and how it's structured. But before that, how does that link, the self-awareness, link to what you were saying 12 months ago? You were, having a look at, what was happening in the pandemic and burnout and keeping a tab on whole households' well-being. How does awareness fit into that? So on the one hand, Trinity Network is being proactive. What is it that you're seeing then in leaders that matches onto that?
Yeah, so I think when we were in the midst of the pandemic, the observation I was making was that the reaction of different staff members to an increased stress and management issue, the way they reacted to it was very, very different.
Mm-hmm.
So I had some staff, and it looked to me like every day they woke up in a pandemic, they were saying, I was born for a day like this. There was just that sense of love, the challenge and the opportunity. There were, new spaces. For other people, they woke up thinking, when will the pandemic end? Because I want to get back to doing what I normally do. And that, it seemed to me, is your spectrum of personality types. Now, the risk with the personality type was, I was born for a day such as this. They then tended to over-rev in the space.
Yeah.
How do I adapt? How do I do more? We'll just start more services because we can't. We'll just run 6 services, not 2. It'll be fine, and keep working that way and not counting some of the cost of that. Other people were saying, well, we can't do what we were doing, so we won't do anything. That sort of, and it wasn't quite like that, but there was a tendency that way.
It's coping mechanism. Yeah.
Exactly.
Ways of coping.
Yeah. So I think in part it was trying to walk with different leaders through that space. And so, like at a network level, what I kept saying to the pastors was, don't bother reading the latest mandates that the government puts out. Don't try and work at the wrinkle space for doing things. At the central level, we will do that work for you. Right? Let you know what's going on in, hopefully in good time for you to make adjustments, but there's no need for us all to be experts on the legislation. We'll provide that and we'll help you move forward. And we try to give some frameworks for people to work within that we thought were going to be the healthy spaces for people to work in, but also enabling each person to understand and monitor, given their personality, how they were dealing with the situation, how their households were going in the space, all those sorts of things. So I think that it's in those sort of spaces. And I think one of the things I'm often doing with staff is to, normally it's in the midst of challenge, to try and think through why they're finding a situation challenging, and to then rework themselves in that space, knowing that they've got support. So I think in my approach with leaders, what I've kept trying to say is, under God, you are more important than what you do, and therefore let's focus on you in this space. Like, I'm really keen for our staff to serve well and faithfully, but I want them to understand how they'll do that in a rich way moving forward, not in a way that just produces a lot. I think that's the sort of thing we're trying to do.
Yeah, looking at the long term, so there have been times where different staff has struggled, and part of it is saying, look, it's okay to struggle sometimes. Like in life, we will all have times where we really struggle. And I mean, when you look back, you think that's where I really grew so often too, but that it's okay sometimes not to be coping. And that if that's the case, they need to feel free and safe to say that, and then make adjustments, and you'll often work with them. And in fact, sometimes Paul will frustrate staff by saying, no, you're not going to come back quite yet on full time, that actually you need, we've got somebody in for the next however long and just kind of, because sometimes we're our own worst enemies, and you have to be a bit careful not to be patronizing, but there is a sense of sometimes you're in a state where you don't quite know what is going to be helpful for the long term. So getting the supports around graduating back into, full capacity. So that sense of sticking with people for the long term, and that over we have many staff that have been here for a long time. Let's say over a 10-year period, 15, 20 years, you will have a downtime or two, and you're going to have crises in the family. You're going to have this nasty conflict that is going to push your buttons, and then just try to work out, well, how do you safely navigate that for long-term ministry, even if this year might be not the best year.
That's right. Yeah. So it was a couple of weeks ago, I was talking with someone who just talked to me about the fact they felt like they were hitting a bit of a wall. And I just tried to talk them through the process for moving back to a much healthier space. And I said to them, look, this is a person that's, say, 40-ish. I said, what I'm really keen is that when you get to 70 years of age, you're saying, it's been wonderful to be in full-time gospel work this whole period. So that's my goal. So we need to do the things now that help you have that sort of experience moving forward, and to make sure that we don't have a very short-term lens that we read this through. So put in place the sort of longer-term strategies for actually being in that sort of spot. Because, like for us, we're, at getting towards the end of our formal ministry sort of years, but we've loved being in ministry and we continue to enjoy it and get excited by it. Well, I want that for everybody moving forward. So how do we help people do that, I think, is one of our goals.
So you have a board, and then what comes after that?
So the board, the network has a board that has oversight, really the carriage of where we're going as a network of churches, a partnership of churches. So they're trying to establish some of the framework things that help the churches flourish. From there, in many ways, there's a delegated responsibility for me thinking through the implications of that on the ground. And I work with now, this is fairly recent, but some what I've called lead pastors who have regional responsibilities. So we've got the churches split into, say, 4 regions at this point. And the idea is those lead pastors work close. The lead pastors are senior pastors of churches, but they work with other senior pastors as a cluster moving forward. I tend to work with the lead pastors, although I touch base with other senior pastors. Each of our churches has a leadership team, so a group that have the carriage of thinking through health at the local church level, and the senior pastor is with, say, 4 to 5 other people in that leadership team thinking through those issues. So it goes board, almost an executive group for the network, lead pastors, and 14 churches with senior pastors and leadership teams. That's the sort of the tiered sort of structure at this point.
Switch modes a little bit. When you think about, Sue, wives, I often think the podcast is so heavily geared towards families, mainly because that's what the survey participants said, and the pool, so we'll stick within that. But the top reasons for clergy thinking about leaving the ministry was the impact on family and loneliness. The third one being the work stress. But what we hear in our clinical work is when husbands are out many evenings, 2, 3, sometimes 4 evenings a week, families with young children, mums coping then with a lot of the caregiving, and just the stress of everyday life, school and, special needs, diet that kids have. How does one thrive as a family? I think, what have you seen really helps and work at that practical level?
Yeah, I think it needs to be a something that the husband and wife and the whole church really, but work out together, because there can be and it has to be a genuine seeking to honor God together, and to raise your family together and to minister together, however form that might take. But I think sometimes where it goes awry, if you like, is where it's can be a guise for selfishness. So the husband might be being selfish. And so it's all about me because it's all about ministry, but really it's all about me. So the wife is then kind of seen as a resource, and the kids too, to sort of build up the husband in an unhealthy, ungodly kind of way. And you know, I've got to fill this gap because otherwise my husband won't succeed, sort of thing. So trying to get out of that sort of thinking and thinking that we really want to all serve God well together. We're in it together. Just a slightly different way of thinking, and a husband that is genuinely servant-hearted within the family setting, but then you can go the other way, of course, and you forget the big vision, which is that all together we want to see God's we want to be serving God. We want to keep the big goal in mind. So I think part of it is getting the heart right, the heart of the wife right, the heart of the husband right, the teamwork right. So I think that makes for a healthy, and being honest. So we all do only have, 24 hours in a day, 7 days in a week. So, Paul and I would take stock, for example, each year. Okay, what is working? So, for example, I've run a business on the side, risk management for lawyers and doctors, and that's kind of helped me, when the kids were little, when they were at school, that I started doing that, and, a day a week or a couple of days a week, and it worked for me. But each year we would honestly say, what's working, what isn't working, and be prepared to make adjustments, both of us, in different things. We'd think through ministry things, what's feasible, what isn't feasible, and we would change at different points. I've got to prepare the good works God's prepared, do the good works God's prepared beforehand for us to work in. I was thinking, if it's not feasible, like we had Paul's mum stay with us with dementia for about 6 months. Well, it wasn't feasible to have people in the home. At that point, she'd be scared. So we had to say, that's not the good work that God has for us at this moment. And so we'd adjust it. When the kids were little, they loved having the friends around. That's when they got Tim Tams, so we'd make all the special treats around all the church stuff. But but then there was other periods where, not another night. So then we'd readjust. So remembering that there's huge flexibility in how you do it. So being creative, getting your heart right first, but then realizing how that works out in practice will change from periods and stages of life, from circumstances, from where you're up to, and just using that to meet your big goals, and glorify God and see people come into the kingdom and people grow, but doing that within an honest capacity of where you're at and where you're at as a household. Yeah.
We're always keen for our kids. Our prayer was that our kids would grow up always knowing the love and mercy and grace of God. We wanted that to be the case. Now, we didn't want our household just to be kid-centric, but nonetheless, that was a good desire that we had, that our kids would keep experiencing in a ministry family sort of setting that growth of knowledge, so that they'd never feel like they'd dipped out because they're in a ministry family, and that our heart's desire was they'd always know that to be the case. So we never guarantee our kids' salvation. Only God can save people, but I think that's a good goal to have in a ministry household. The kids flourish as believers, because they're growing up in a believing household, moving forward and setting a pattern for that, I think.
Yeah. A couple of other things. One thing that I've tried to keep in mind and tried to keep encouraging the wives is wives. And as we talk with ministry households, not every struggle is because you're in ministry. Because, I'm thinking, I grew up in a family, Dad was busy all the time, we had lots of different stresses and strains in life and financial things and, whatever. So, lots of people around us are struggling too in just, we're in a broken world. So not allocating everything because you're in ministry, I think, is helpful. So being realistic, but also being realistic that there are some things because you're in ministry, and so that you've sort of chosen to do, but that might mean doesn't mean you don't grieve the difficulties. And then so just being leadership, I remember kind of almost laughing at myself at points where I thought, I thought they were my friend. But really, they were thinking of me just as a leader. Somebody had a party and they didn't invite me to it, and I think, clearly, a few things like that along the way, and we all get that. And you think, oh, it's probably a bit pathetic, but you actually do feel a bit sad. You think, oh, I thought it was deeper than that.
Which probably is part of that loneliness thing you were talking about.
Yeah.
There can be a sense of isolation that you're always sort of grappling with.
Yeah. And so I've talked to the wives about that as well. And they...
So they all
share.
They all now invite you.
Yeah, every party now, no, but just that sense of that there is a difference sometimes for some people. They can't seem to quite get over the fact that you're the minister's wife, and that's So then you have to work out, well, then how do you have supports and encouragement? So, for instance, both of us have had groups for decades. We've gone to have a little prayer group with four lovely, three. There's four of us that have met for decades, since our kids. And even this morning, there was WhatsApp groups going around, messages going around for someone who's got to make a big decision. So there's that support and long-term encouragement where we're all just friends. We're not anybody's anything. And you've had a similar sort of...
Yeah, I've been part of a men's breakfast group with about 6 other men, probably now for 25 years or so, fairly regular group. They're all 10 years older than me, so I see them, dealing with issues 10 years in front of me, and but also because they're older, they have less sense of me being, in a good way, me being their pastor. They still see it that way, and they have great respect, but nonetheless, they're at a different sort of point. Yeah.
Well, how do you...
Oh, sorry, there was just one more thing on the suffering of family. One thing I think we have to be careful is suffering isn't always bad. And so sometimes our families will suffer, but as long as it's handled well, that's not necessarily the worst thing in the world. So you don't want trauma because you've got trauma. Just deal with the one trauma. So having a mindset that sometimes suffering is okay, and it's we're safe in it, and we've got to work through it. And it's not pleasant, and it may not be fair, but that it's not necessarily the worst thing that's happened, if you like.
So I think, having visited you both, you're flexible. You have a great friendship with one another. The Paul and Sue friendship is very evident. You're fun. You have fun with one another.
Actually, fun is really important in ministry. For us it is. Just that sense out of the intensity of it all.
So Sue's the fun police in our family. She's in charge of that.
And I think you have a deep sense of fellowship. So it probably is the last thing I just wanted to ask you. With the conflict that was being reported in my survey, I'm sure you have conflict within your churches and your network as well. But I'm wondering, what do you think is happening? Why do we have these levels of, sort of almost warlike conflict with one another? And what helps with that, do you think? It's a big question.
I know one of the things that helps, one of the things that Paul does and has consistently had this drumbeat, is we're not going to sweat the small things. We're not going to fight about things that aren't central or very important. So drumbeat in sermons, drumbeat in conversations. Paul will meet with leadership groups and with the pastors and...
So I think just trying to say, often in church circles, people get upset about not significant things, and you do want to listen to those, but not too much. That is, you want to keep saying, what we're on about are these big things, and these other things we won't be on about. So that's a culture setting thing from that point of view. I think a straightforwardness in relationships with people. If there are issues, we'll talk about them. So one of my staff the other day said to me, he said, I was with a group of senior pastors and I was grumbling about you to them over something. This is one of my senior pastors, and he said, I just want to apologize. It wasn't appropriate. But from my point of view, I wanted to know why he was grumbling. That is the content of that. Because my job is not to frustrate you. My job is trying to encourage you in ministry. And he might have been grumbling because I was, as I thought it turned out, probably I was taking him to task over something that he needed to. But I actually want to hear, because I may not have done the best. So creating that culture of openness for dealing with stuff. I think keeping short memories. So Sue will sometimes say, oh, remember we had this issue with someone like that, some time ago, and I'll genuinely not be able to remember it. And perhaps I just blank out all the nasty things, but I think
you just don't go over and over.
I try not to ruminate on things.
Forgetfulness is another F, and feedback.
Yeah.
So I normally finish up by asking 3 questions. If there was a ministry leader, and let's go with household, because I love that we've been able to talk about households. If there was a ministry family listening to our conversation today, what's one thing you'd like them to walk away to think about or to do?
So I think what I love ministry families, and I don't say this lightly because I know that many people are going through significant struggles, but it's almost remembering the joy and privilege of being in a ministry family, and to remember the grace and mercy that you've been shown, the fact that you've been able to be set apart, that even if it's even if they're going through a difficult time right now, those things are still true. And I think just constantly remembering that sense of it's always a privilege to be in the family of God. Then I think for those of us set aside for leadership among God's people, it's a double privilege. Not always an easy one, but still a privilege, I think.
Yeah, and centered on the very core thing that God is doing in all the universe. So keeping that bigger vision. This is for eternity, that that God is doing, and we have the privilege of being part of that.
Yeah. And then a practical thing for families I would think is there is a risk of isolation. That is, even within couples, you can spend a lot of time rolling something around together, and taking time to sit down with some other people and to talk about it and share that issue or difficulty that's going on. It may not halve it, but it'll sure help it a lot, I think, in terms of moving forward, to know there's not that disconnect, and you don't have to deal with it in isolation. And sometimes there can be wrong reasons for keeping isolated. There can be a pride or a fear attached to the process. But nonetheless, I think sitting down with trusted people to bounce stuff around is enormously helpful,
and particularly other people that understand the situation. Like there is a bit nothing new under the sun when it comes to some of the difficulties in leadership that there is.
And if there was a church listening in, so some people have got Bible studies subscribed to the podcast, or care committees subscribed, what's one thing you'd love for them to think about or do in terms of understanding how we do ministry together? And I
think genuinely loving your pastor and their whole family. That's I think that's one of the joys that we've had, is feeling genuinely loved and cared for, and almost embarrassed at points by the level of love and care. I think everybody's praying for us. Other people, this person's got the same sort of issue. So that's it. But it actually does help you. It's like generosity breeds generosity. That sense of kindness and grace going backwards and forwards. So genuinely loving and working out what is genuinely loving for for this pastor's family, which might be different to somebody else. So getting to know them, working out what is genuinely loving and helpful to help them serve you and God best.
Yeah. So I think Sue mentioned it earlier, when we have staff join our network, I do say to them, you'll be given respect by your congregation. That will be a given for you. Not always the case, I don't think, as I talk to people, but you can lose that, you can reinforce that, but you'll be given it. I think I'd like to say to church leadership, groups, congregations, go out of your way to respect and honour your leaders. In other words, treat them in the way you want them to operate, as honourable, people of integrity and people that are trusted, because if you treat them that way, you'll bring out the best in them. So that culture of not that pastors aren't to be pedestaled, but that respect and honour and love, I think, is really critical.
Which is biblically mandated.
Yeah,
God's ways work. Yeah.
And finally, and I know you will say that you're not perfect in the way that you've structured your network, you're still working it out, but if there are other denominations or sort of other networks trying to figure out, okay, how do we help our ministry families in a post-pandemic busyness, burnt out, exhausted way, what's one thing you'd like them to think or do?
I'll jump in.
Yeah.
So I think the risk with, and we experience as a network as we grow, the easy thing to do is to organise, develop policy and structure, and become a little mechanical about the way we facilitate stuff. And what I'm keen for us to do is I think that's a denominational risk, actually. That's characterised as denominations that get a bit separated and structured and formalised. I'm keen for us to continue being a network of churches, and the network idea is the partnership idea, and it's partnership in the gospel, and so that we only ever come up with structures and formal things that help us partner together well in moving forward with the gospel. And that's a highly relational activity as we take the gospel to people and as we share the gospel together moving forward. So I think that sense of keeping on maintaining that gospel fidelity relationally with those who are lost as well as those who believe, and how you facilitate that moving forward. I reckon as you grow, that's the area that can often get lost. Yeah.
Yes, and it's interesting, it can work both ways, because we're finding we need a few more structures.
Yep.
So it's minimal, viable, effective governance, if you like, that's relationally based and with a purpose. It's that kind of idea. You need some structures as you get bigger, because you can't just all do it by word of mouth. People have to understand what's going on, but at the same time, not let that take over. And it's for a purpose, and it's to encourage ministry, and effectiveness.
Thank you so much for spending time with me today, Paul and Sue.
Great pleasure.
Delighted to be with you, Valerie.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. If you liked what you heard and you think others should hear it too, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Catch you later.